On the Line, Perspectives on Partition with me, Paul McFadden. This is the second in a series of conversations organised by the Bloody Sunday Trust, in which people from across the community share their thoughts on something which happened 100 years ago. 100 years ago, you might say, why are we talking about something that happened 100 years ago? Well, if you want to know why partition is so important, just look at how, right up to today, a century after the island was divided into separate political jurisdictions, the ramifications of that act continue to be felt. The seismic aftershocks continue to shake and threaten huge international issues, agreements and treaties, such as, for example, the Brexit one. Partition may be part of history here, but at times it actually feels more like current affairs. To pursue its implications today and to get her thoughts on the line, her perspective on partition, we're joined by Eileen Weir from the Shankill Women's Centre. Eileen, it's a pleasure and an honour to meet you, albeit virtually. First of all, unfortunately, it's not face to face in person, but it's better than not meeting you and conversing with you at all. I wanted to talk about a thing. 3 years ago, almost, you got a great award. You received the 2018 Community Relations Exceptional Achievement Award. That was in March 2018. And I just wonder how you feel community relations are now. What is the state of community relations now in this community? I hate to talk about the communities. I prefer to talk about the community. But what is it like between people living within this community from the different traditions?
Well, Paul, you know, I mean, a lot of my work, all of my work, I have to say, is women within communities. So it's not a signal identity work that I do. I don't do any signal identity work as for say, you know, there'd be the odd occasion, but it wouldn't necessarily be just within the Protestant tradition. You know, I work very much right across North and West Belfast and beyond. You know, I would tie in with Dublin, I would tie in with different rural communities as well. And it's part of that good relations that, you know, I am a frequent visitor to Derry, you know, just to see how things is done in Derry, to see if we can implement some of the same things in the areas that I work in, and how they get around different aspects of things that happen on the ground. So, you know, part of my role, I coordinate Greater North Belfast Women's Network, and we're always going on study visits to look at good practices, no matter where they are, to see if we can get something from them. Uh, so, you know, the Good Relations Award, I accepted the Good Relations Award, but the real winners of that award was the women who actually took part in the programs that I was doing, because without those women taking part and taking the risks, I wouldn't have got no award. You know, I was being recognised for the work that the women were doing, although I was maybe steering them and coordinating them, but it was them who done the hard work on the ground. You know, they took risks, they done things that maybe sometimes under the radar, but they actually done it. And without those women, you know, the day I got the award, I invited all the women that I had worked with, you know, because I was accepting the award on their behalf. And, you know, as I explained on the day, good relations is not one thing. I mean, good relations is like making a pot of soup. You know, it's a whole lot of things. You know, one doesn't work without the other. You don't get vegetable soup without vegetables. You know, so I sort of way on the day sort of I likened the work that I done to making a pot of homemade soup, uh, uh, and put all the different ingredients into that pot. And I think that's what good relations should be about. And it shouldn't be about one sector of the community or the other. It should be good relations to me. Yes, there's internal relations that need built as well. But the good relations for me is getting people to go to a safe space and to have the difficult conversation, and I facilitate that difficult conversation.
I think even in creating safe spaces, that makes an enormous achievement to the attempt to, to develop and to progress community relations in this island. But I mean, and by the way, Eileen, I've only today made a pot of vegetable soup myself, so I'm a bit of a dab hand at it. But come here, as a woman, I'm pretty sure, like most of the women I would know, you've a very keen eye, sharp observational powers, good memory for retaining stuff and all of that. When you've come to Derry in those visits, and I'm interested in how you think sort of life as experienced by people, maybe especially women in this city in Derry, compares to that experienced by the woman in your community in Belfast. I mean, the cities themselves, for example, Derry's a border city. It tends to look south.
Yeah.
Belfast is mainly unionist, although that's changing now, of course. I mean, it's probably no longer actually a unionist majority city, let's face it, but a city that for much of its history looked east. So how do they compare, and how do the experiences of lives lived in them compare?
Well, I can only speak on my own experiences and doing the study visits that I have done. I have worked with the Bloody Sunday Trust and took a group of women down to the Bloody Sunday Trust to look at the Derry model. I've also, worked with Catherine Cook in the Hopewell Centre, and also Carl from across the other side of the river, and worked with women in Rothlin. So Rothmore. So I would say I just didn't go to one area in Derry. 2 years ago on International Women's Day, I was the guest speaker at the Bogside along with Martina Anderson, and I think those type of communications and those type of events and getting to know the people hands-on. I'm hands-on. I work on the ground. I work with individuals. I work with groups, but I try to find out from other women working in the same areas as within. The good example of, I think when I first started up in that work, I was aware, because of the women's movement and the women's sector, I know a lot of people within it. And my first visit to Derry as network coordinator was down to the Foyles Women's Network down in Derry, and we're a regular invite to their conferences every year, and there's things that we were only starting off, but there was things that network was doing that we then took a wee bit of, right, we could do that too. We could bring women together. We could talk and have the difficult conversations. The difference that I see, that Derry has it better. I'm not saying life in Derry may be better, because we all have our issues and all have our problems and our conflicts. Was that when there's like the parades, which is a big thing in Derry, and I've had some illustrations of what can go wrong with parades, where people are all around the table. Everybody's around the table. There's no one wee section around the table to discuss what happens in Derry. There's a number of different people, different organisations, community organisations, statutory organisations deciding what happens in Derry.
So it was work really, in a sense.
Yeah, I don't see that happening in Belfast when it comes to those issues. It looks as if, and it seems to be, the same people all the time around that table. One of the biggest problems I think we have within the women's movement and the women's sector is getting around the table. We're still sort of way trying to get our feet under the table. And that's not to say that we want rid of men around the table, because that's not the case. We just want to be part of that conversation.
Isn't that remarkable itself, the way when you consider that the first and deputy first ministers here are both women?
Absolutely, absolutely. But I can only talk from my own experience on the ground. I'm working with groups on the ground, and okay, there's getting feet around it. I look at it within the community setting. as seat round the table. Now, there's women, the women's movement is looking for seats at different levels round the table. Now, even if you get a seat as round the table within our politicians, because we have a lot of women political representation now, it doesn't help me on the ground not getting my feet round the table, because if things are not from the bottom up, then it'll not work. You know, this from the top down has been proven not to work. But if we can actually get it at grassroots level and see the concerns and see what's happening at grassroots level, then that can feed up, so it can be from the bottom up and from the top down. And we need people at different levels within the community sector to be at those tables at those different levels.
Let's talk about the experience at grassroots level and in these different parts of the community, if I may use that phrase. I mean, how much do women and families and people generally have in common in your experience at that grassroots level? What the 20 odd years now after we had the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, the Belfast Agreement?
Okay, you talk about 20 odd years, I talk about 30 odd years, because the women's sector is gone. I know Shankel's 34 years gone this year, and Falls, I think, set 37 years. So there's just two examples of the work that women were doing before the Good Friday Agreement. And I don't think they get enough recognition for the work that was done at grassroots level 30 years ago, 32 years ago, and this was keeping bringing women together under the radar, because it wasn't safe. There was no safe spaces then. It wasn't safe to do it openly. But it became okay to be safe to do it openly once Paisley and Martin McGuinness shook hands. We were all friends then, but we were already friends. We were already working together right across the movement. And I believe, it's my belief, and many people like me, that without the work of the women's centres and the women's movement, we wouldn't have that Good Friday Agreement, because we were actually, women were looking for hope at the time, and we done a lot of work around the Good Friday Agreement prior to the voting of the Good Friday Agreement. And I believe if it wasn't for the work of the women's movement and the women's sector at that time, we probably wouldn't be talking about the Good Friday Agreement.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't simply complain it. You know, I applaud the aspiration that existed among women, but I applaud the courage too. I mean, I think back to an incident in this city a number of years back when women in Craigan helped ballot boxes to be moved safely from a polling station in Craigan, despite a threat from rioters in the community who wanted to, you know, threaten that process. It was the woman who stood up and challenged them and confronted them and ensured that those votes went to the county centre and were considered, you know. So you've not just the aspiration and that kind of encouragement that came from women, but courage as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a lot of risks, a lot of danger involved in it, but we were able to do it. Because a lot of people thought women's centres were just set up to have wee knitting clubs and wee cups of tea and wee chats, and suppose it suited us for people to think that, while we got on with the real work. They could think what they really wanted to think. You know, the slogan of Shankill Women's Centre at that time was the hummingbird, you know, because people told us on the Shankill, not me, because I wasn't part of the original setup. I joined 26 years ago, but the reason why they called it the hummingbird was because they were told it would never last. And the hummingbird is the only bird that can fly backwards. So we take the slogan, you know, I mean, if a hummingbird can fly backwards, women can make difference in people's lives. And it is about making a difference, because I don't believe that a community worker, especially a good relations worker, is in the job if they don't think they can make a difference. I wouldn't be doing the work that I do if I didn't think it was making a difference. Now, I'm not saying it makes a difference of a whole community, but if I make a difference in 5 or 6 women's lives, I've done my job. I've done my work.
Big impact.
Yeah.
I'm going to fly you back in history now then.
You're
Borrowing from your hummingbird analogy, what are your thoughts on partition, Eileen? Because I mean, it was a huge event in the history, not just of the community in Northern Ireland, not just within this island, not even anymore simply within these islands, but it also it is now sort of appearing as a major issue, a major problem, a major stumbling block in relation to the question of Brexit. So, your
yeah.
thoughts on partition?
Again, I'm not a historian, but you know, what I do know of it, it looks very similar to what we're actually, you know, the Good Friday Agreement and how that came about, and the discontentment with some people and the welcoming of other people. And when you look back of how partition happened, well, the fourth Home Rule Bill, you know, it failed, it failed, it failed. The war, you know, if it had happened 1912, you know, in the earlier 1914, it might have been a different beast at that time. And then the war, the World War took place, and then we came back to it, and not everybody was happy with it. The nationalists, some nationalists weren't happy with what the petition was saying, the Home Rule Bill was saying, the Treaty of Ireland was saying, right across the island. I don't even think Carson and Raymond were happy with it either, but it was the best that we could, that there was at that time. I do believe that, you know, it was a way out the British government to, at that time, to convert civil war within areas. You know, again, you know, when you look at Carson and then mobilization of the UVF, they weren't fighting Catholics, they were fighting the bill, they were fighting the British government, because that's what they were about at that time. You know, it just, the Good Friday, to me, I related it very much to all the stuff that happened around the Good Friday Agreement, and coming up to the Good Friday Agreement, and how hard it was for the political and the both sides of the community to come together to do a Good Friday Agreement because of petition and because of what had happened 100 years ago. Did we get it right? I don't believe we did get it right to a certain degree. There was a lot of things left out of it. The thing about the Brexit and bringing up the petition, and that's been a lot of the conversations that I have been having within the community over the last couple of years, you know, from coming out of Europe. You know, there's a lot of scaremongering among communities about, you know, we're going to become a United Ireland, we're going to become a shared Ireland. Depends on the language that you're using. And I firmly believe to talk about unity at this time is the wrong time to talk about unity. Yes, it's within the Good Friday Agreement that it can be on the table, but there's an awful lot of things that we haven't received out of the Good Friday Agreement that we agreed to, that we actually voted for, which I don't believe, I could be wrong, that the Partition of Ireland was actually voted by the people on the ground, by the grassroots.
Partition?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was opposed by government.
It was opposed by governments. Yeah. You know,
Yeah.
the difference between that and the Good Friday Agreement, the people actually voted for it, you know, and the result was of the result of a whole vote for people to vote for it or against it. And we all got a book through the door to read of what the Good Friday Agreement meant. That didn't happen in petition. And I think what we should be learning from what happened 100 years ago, not to make the same mistakes again 100 years in, to make sure what happens this time round lasts longer, you know, that we have a peace on this island, whatever that island may look like. I think it has to be done by the will of the people and not become a political thing, but it has to be for the betterment of every individual, not just one section of the community or the other. And until our political representatives can work together, how can you bring two nations together? I just don't think it's on the cards at this minute in time.
What about what does the union mean to you, Eileen? I mean, I may be wrong, but I can't imagine that you'd be sort of rushing headlong into a united Ireland. How important is the union to you, and what is the benefit of the union to you? Membership of the union.
Well, for me personally, and I can only speak personally, I'm all for what's the best for me, for the people. If you said to me what I would vote for, I would just say, let me see what I'm voting for. You know, if there's a better standard of
Does that
life,
mean that you'd be open to persuasion on?
absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. I announced only the union, you know, so my lifetime I've been part of this union, but I also was part of Europe at one time. Uh, when they come out with this is what it's going to look like by staying part of the United Kingdom, and this is what it's going to look like by becoming United Ireland or Shared Ireland. I will make my decision then based on the social and economic value that people's lives have better lives and not a worse life. I'm a socialist thinking person, so I want the best for everybody and not just for one section of the community.
So did
Uh,
Brexit rattle your sort of confidence in the union?
well, it did. I don't think it helped it. You know, in particular because Northern Ireland voted to stay within Europe. So, you know, I mean, that vote itself told the tale that they wanted to maintain their European identity. And when people try to trick me into what are you, and my passport says I'm European. So I'm still European, you know, no matter what happens. And I think I'm maintained to be European no matter what happens. You know, where I live doesn't really say who I am. I would be the same person where I was living in Dublin or living in Belfast. You know, that wouldn't change my outlook in life. I would be looking to see that, you know, you see how the welfare reform has affected us here. And I wouldn't want anything that would add to the hardship and the poverty of people who actually live on the ground. And should that mean staying within the union, that's where I'm going to vote. If that means being part of an All Ireland, then that's where I would vote too, personally.
Interesting that for all your reservations about the Good Friday Agreement, that one of the things that does allow you and I to do is to be remain as members of the European Union or
Yeah, yeah,
citizens of the European Union. So at least as that in his favour. I want to go back as a final question to you, if I may, Eileen, to an interview you did with a journalist almost 20 years ago, 2002, so 19 years ago. And on that occasion, you were being asked a question about, and you were in responding, you were talking about the troubles, the conflict, and you said, "I hate going back to conflict because we're never going to go back there. Not in my eyes. Never going to go back to conflict." Would you be as confident today that we're not going to go back to conflict? I mean, just as we speak, we've had police sort of talking about sort of strange goings on in the community. There's talk of intelligence gathering happening. We've had graffiti. We've had threats against workers and things like that. Would you be as rock solid, certain, sure that we're not going to go back to conflict in this community?
yeah. I would, yeah. I would, because the we're talking together now. Our communities are talking together, in particular women. I can speak, and I would say on probably a yearly basis, I would meet with about 100 and say, well, about 720 women, just single women, a year, and not one of them would support uh, any type of violent campaign in the future. Uh, Propaganda on the ground and things like that. And that's what we need to stay away from, because there's fears within communities, and it depends what community you live in and what's been said in that community. And I just don't like putting the fear into people to think of going back to where we were. We have a younger population, and we always talk about our youth in a very negative way, but I would talk about our youth in a very positive way, because our youth are living their lives the way I lived my life before the Troubles. They're going across to each other's houses. They're actually dating each other. They're celebrating events together, and it doesn't matter what those events are. But our young people will be our future, and the majority of young people will not want to, don't want to even know what happened to them 100 years ago. They're focused what they want to see for the future, and I think that's no bad thing. You know, a lot of the stuff that's happening. I'm not saying that there isn't young people there that would want to break what we have got, but I think the majority of our youth is looking more to the future and not looking back in the past. They didn't live it. You know, they're maybe children of the Troubles, but they didn't live it. Maybe their grandparents lived it, maybe their parents lived it, but they didn't live it. And any of them that I know who I would come across, they're not a bit interested. You know, we have young women come into Shankill Women's Centre and they know nothing, and they don't want to know nothing. You know, they're more interested in their wee families, getting a wee house, you know, getting a decent job, and living in a comfortable way, that they're not getting out of the poverty is their main focus. And we have a lot of great young women, but also a lot of great young men who are going to lead the way for the future. I don't think our political setup at the minute works in anybody's favour, where we have a five-party coalition. Uh, my plan for the future would love to have an opposition government, and then I think we can move forward with that. But while we have that five-party, uh, you know, in power, I don't believe we're going to move very quickly. So the quicker our young people take over and have a proper system that treats everybody equally and get rid of the orange and green, the better for everybody that lives here.
Eileen, very uplifting conversation, I have to say. It's been an honour and a privilege to meet with you online. Thanks for being so candid and sharing your thoughts. And you said at the outset that you weren't an historian, but in my book, it's always better to be a history maker than somebody who's writing about the history. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. And thanks for being so open and going on the line with your thoughts on partition. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Paul.
Look forward to the next time in our series of conversations on the line, perspectives on partition.